In my last video about freedom and what it means to be free and what I'm dealing with whilst regaining my freedom, I ended with why I believe every prisoner should be free, or rather, my proposition that every prisoner should be free. My proposition of prison abolition has nothing to do with whether or not I actually like a person. It has nothing to do with personalities involved, individual criminals, specters of serial killers, etc. What it does involve is a structural analysis of hypocrisy. And we live in an institutionalized authoritarian regime of magnitude and scale, which is absolutely terrifying, absolutely frightening, and it is why many of us are like deer in the headlights when it comes to talking about radically altering the socio-political, economic, and racial terrain that we currently live in. So many forces are pushing us further and further in the authoritarian fascist direction that is very important to counter these vindictive imaginary fantasies of the masses, which are becoming incredibly popular, with something that is open to not knowing. And that's what prison abolition is. It's open to not knowing. Prison demands knowing. It demands you've done the crime, you do the time. It demands that you know, that we know this person. We know this person's going to be put away. Right? We know because we've policed, we've prosecuted, we've come to some sort of truth procedure, we've come to a conclusion. We can now imprison, confine, rehabilitate, rejuvenate, debilitate, and then throw the subject onto the street. Because we know. We know that person's bad. We know. We know. No, prison abolition is about being open, and don't assume that it is about solely compassion. There's compassionate elements in it. And in fact, prison abolition has a very, for me at least, the idea of prison abolition and calling every prisoner a political prisoner, whether they're fighting for human rights in Russia or Chelsea Manning or Charles Manson, seems to be absurd if we think about it on an individual level. But if we think about it on a macro structural level, which is what I'm going to ask you to do for a second, just think about this for a second. On a big level of society, we have people at the top of the socioeconomic, racial, political hierarchy, the military-industrial complex, the various entities, public and otherwise, which run the day-to-day functioning of the planet in which we live on, engaged in genocidal wars, okay? These are wars against entire nations. The Iraq War is 1 million people dead. We're talking about 1 million people dead. We're talking about fallout from one war. We're talking about fallout rippling across the Middle East, destabilizing, creating this situation further radicalizing, which every person who was against the war said before, that further radicalizing the populations, creating outgrowths, some of them potentially backed by the CIA, etc., backed by the CIA, etc., 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 etc. Who knows what else, and then that's just one incident that I've mentioned. I haven't talked about Afghanistan. I haven't talked about Libya. Which is, if you're a big liberal and you love Obama, we've got a problem. Obama has got to be held accountable. Because what is prison abolition other than saying, let's apply, I think if we re-theorize this for a second, let's apply the law parametrically. There isn't even a sentencing guideline for what Obama did in Libya. Maybe the Nuremberg principles. I don't know. This is, do we have to? This is what Bush did. These are not crimes that our system can even register. So instead of punishing these people, we give them speaking deals and book contracts, and they go on Ellen DeGeneres and make jokes, and they live in huge mansions. So rewarding genocidal terrorism, weapons dealers, wealthy Wall Street fraudsters, Hank Paulson, Timothy Geithner, Bernanke, these people come in like the mafia, big-time hyper-mafia, steal hundreds of millions of dollars, create trillions of dollars in fake money, Mickey Mouse money that doesn't mean anything, and enrich themselves and have 12 homes somewhere, while 7.6 million people starve to death every year. Because the resource allocation on this planet is so fucked up because we have these wealthy fraudsters constantly sucking wealth like a vampire through the apparatus that is consumer capitalism. And the entire fiscal credit digitized world that we live in, which coercively pushes people into the labor market, which has been doing so since the common lands were shut down and the people could no longer take care of themselves. And capitalism's chapters ended in began in the 19th century, ended feudalism's chapters, and people were proletarian. I can never use that word. People became members of the proletariat. Okay. Forced worker drones. You go to your office, you go to your factory, you shut up, you do your job, and you let the big men take care of it. And over time, there's a pathology of power, whereby these nation states, and Eric Hobsbawm, who I read in prison, is very good at this. This formation of nation language boundary border is very new. It's like 19th century stuff, and it's European. And in fact, it sort of is coexisting with the rise of this sort of capitalism idea. So we've got the birth of this hyper-nationalism, vindictive ideology, us versus them, all of that coming through alienation. Well, I mean, there's so many processes happening here. It would take me 3-4 decades to analyze them. The point is that the law is not being applied parametrically. And that if we're really concerned about public health and safety, then we really probably should look at the people that are committing genocide. I don't know. And then at the same time, begin to free the guy on the street who sold a bit of crack and the person who's, stole somebody's credit card and that maybe we should begin to do massive clemency for people who pose no current risk to the public. Because start there, that's where prison abolition is beginning. The theoretical analysis begins to take us towards an immediate decarceration of prisoners, and looking at people that are only immediate threats, immediate and grave threats to the public. Well, there's a lot of them sitting in Washington, D.C., Moscow, Beijing. I don't see them in prison.